A respected member of society, family man, or admired professional by all outward appearances, he was the very definition of the American success story. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, and always polite, John R. Whitmore was the kind of man people trusted without question. He wore tailored suits, drove a modest car, and lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a white picket fence and a manicured lawn. Neighbors greeted him with warm smiles, often commenting on how lucky his wife and children were to have such a dedicated husband and father. No one could have guessed that beneath that charming, well-groomed exterior hid the most dangerous killer America had ever known. John worked as a youth counselor at a local community center where he spent his days mentoring troubled teens, organizing charity events, and giving speeches at school assemblies. Teachers praised his ability to connect with students, and local parents often sought his advice when their children struggled. He was frequently recognized in town hall meetings, appearing in local newspapers as a pillar of the community. Behind the scenes, he led fundraisers, volunteered at church events, and hosted backyard barbecues where laughter echoed late into the evening. Even law enforcement officials knew him, not as a suspect, but as a reliable citizen who occasionally helped with community watch programs. His friendly demeanor and calm voice made people feel safe around him. He even lectured once at the local police academy about youth rehabilitation. Ironically, officers would later discover that during some of these appearances, he had already committed several murders. At home, he was viewed as a model father. He never missed a school play or soccer game, and every holiday season, his house was lit up with decorations that neighbors admired. His wife often told friends that she was blessed to have such a supportive husband. He cooked dinner, read bedtime stories, and helped his kids with their homework. To his family, he was their rock, the person they relied on most. But this picture-perfect image was a mask, a carefully crafted illusion designed to deflect suspicion. Beneath his calm exterior lay a deeply disturbed individual capable of unimaginable cruelty. While the community saw a kind and trustworthy man, he was, in fact, America's most elusive and calculating serial killer. What made John R. Whitmore so terrifying was not just the brutality of his crimes, but the way he hid in plain sight. He didn't lurk in shadows. He smiled in photographs, shook hands with officials, and lived among his victims. His ordinary appearance became his greatest weapon, allowing him to evade justice for years. In the end, the mask he wore fooled everyone. The man once admired by his community turned out to be the very monster they feared most, a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a scowl. Sometimes it wears a smile. Clues from childhood or early adulthood hinting at violent tendencies. Long before the world knew John R. Whitmore as a cold-blooded killer, there were subtle yet disturbing signs that something inside him was not quite right. As a child growing up in a small Midwestern town, John was often described as quiet and well-behaved, but those who paid closer attention noticed a different side, one marked by cruelty, manipulation, and emotional detachment. By the age of 8, John had already shown a troubling fascination with death. While other children were content playing games or riding bikes, he spent hours alone in the woods behind his house, trapping and dissecting small animals. When his parents found mutilated birds or squirrels in their yard, he shrugged and blamed stray dogs or cats. His father, a strict and often emotionally distant man, brushed off the incidents as boys being boys, while his mother remained in quiet denial, unwilling to see what was unfolding in front of her. At school, John excelled academically, but struggled socially. Teachers noted that he rarely smiled, avoided eye contact, and didn't form genuine friendships. His interactions were often manipulative. He'd charm a teacher for praise, then mock a classmate behind their back. He had a chilling ability to mimic normal emotions, yet it always seemed like he was performing rather than feeling. One former classmate later recalled, "It was like he was watching us to learn how to be human, not because he actually was." By his teenage years, John's behavior grew darker. He began engaging in petty crimes like vandalism and theft, but he was never caught. He developed a habit of writing violent stories in his journal, disturbing tales filled with torture, control, and death. When one teacher read a particularly graphic short story he submitted in class, she reported it to the school counselor. But when questioned, John smiled and claimed it was just fiction. No further action was taken. John's early relationships were equally unsettling. In high school, he dated a girl for several months, during which she claimed he was emotionally cold and controlling. He would often make strange comments like how most people are just pretending to be alive, or how pain is the purest form of truth. After they broke up, she told friends that being with him felt like living with a mask. You could never see what was really behind his eyes. In college, John studied psychology and criminology, fields that allowed him to better understand human behavior and how to manipulate it. Professors praised his insight, unaware that he was studying not out of curiosity but control. He was laying the groundwork for what would later become his deadly blueprint. These early signs were the quiet tremors before the earthquake, overlooked, dismissed, or hidden behind a facade of normalcy. But in hindsight, they reveal a chilling truth. The darkness that would one day horrify the nation had always been there, silently growing behind a calm, smiling face. Detailed look into the crimes, victims, and signature methods. The true horror of John R. Whitmore's life emerged in the trail of death he left behind, carefully planned, methodically executed, and chillingly consistent. His murders were not acts of rage or impulsive violence. They were cold, calculated events carried out with disturbing precision. Investigators would later describe his killing spree as surgical in nature, comparing his methods to that of a predator who studied his prey before striking. Whitmore's victims shared common traits. Most were young women between the ages of 18 and 30, often with a history of personal struggles, runaways, recovering addicts, or women living alone in transitional housing. These were people who lived on the fringes of society, whose disappearances often went unnoticed for days, sometimes even weeks. He chose them carefully, ensuring minimal connections and maximum control. Each murder followed a pattern that would eventually lead investigators to suspect they were dealing with a serial killer. The victims were usually lured under the guise of help or employment. John, with his clean appearance and soft-spoken demeanor, offered them a ride, a place to stay, or even fake job interviews. Once they trusted him, he took them to secluded locations, often abandoned buildings or remote cabins on the outskirts of town. The killings themselves were marked by a consistent signature. Victims were found posed, often with their hands folded across their chest, eyes closed, and faces cleaned. They were dressed in clean clothes not their own, sometimes even with makeup carefully applied post-mortem. The cause of death varied. Some were strangled, others injected with unknown substances, but the staging always followed the same ritual. This posed appearance led some investigators to believe Whitmore viewed his victims as dolls or art, displaying them as twisted trophies rather than human lives. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his modus operandi was the absence of physical evidence. Whitmore meticulously cleaned the scenes, wiped fingerprints, and avoided leaving any DNA. He wore gloves, used disposable tools, and even learned how to manipulate time of death to mislead forensic experts. In one case, he left a victim's body in a walk-in freezer for days before placing it at the crime scene, confusing investigators for months. Over the span of nearly 7 years, authorities believe John killed at least 18 confirmed victims, though the true number may be higher. Many of the disappearances were initially considered unrelated. It wasn't until 2 victims were found within weeks of each other, both with identical staging, that investigators began connecting the dots. What made Whitmore's crimes even more terrifying was his ability to blend in while committing them. He lived his daily life, attending work, smiling at neighbors, reading bedtime stories, while secretly planning his next kill. His dual life became his camouflage, allowing him to escape suspicion for years. In the end, the murders weren't just acts of violence, they were acts of control. Each one was a message, a performance, and a reminder that evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it comes dressed in kindness. Police efforts, failed leads, and close calls with capture. The investigation into the murders committed by John R. Whitmore spanned nearly a decade, marked by confusion, misdirection, and a series of agonizing near misses. From the very beginning, law enforcement faced a case unlike any they had seen. Victims with no obvious connection, crime scenes scrubbed clean, and a killer who moved like a shadow. The challenge wasn't just catching him, it was realizing that he existed at all. Early in the case, each murder was treated as an isolated incident. The first few victims were from different towns, different backgrounds, and had disappeared under slightly different circumstances. With no clear evidence linking the crimes, local police departments filed their reports separately. There was no central task force, no pattern detected, and no public warning issued. This lack of coordination gave Whitmore the freedom to continue without pressure. It wasn't until victim number 7, found in a forested area just outside of Chicago, that investigators noticed the now infamous staging, the carefully folded hands, the meticulously cleaned body, the unsettling sense of ritual. A young detective named Rachel Sandler pushed to compare notes with other departments and noticed similarities. Her suspicions were initially dismissed, but her persistence eventually led to the formation of a joint task force. Even with that breakthrough, catching Whitmore proved nearly impossible. He left no forensic evidence behind. The victims, often socially isolated, rarely had connections that led back to him. He used fake names, disposable phones, and was always several steps ahead. In one instance, he was stopped during a routine traffic check, only miles away from where a body would be discovered 2 days later. At the time, he had nothing suspicious in his vehicle and cooperated fully. The officer let him go. There were moments when justice came painfully close. In 2016, a woman managed to escape from a locked room where she had been held for over 24 hours. Disoriented and traumatized, she gave police a vague description of a man with a calm voice and neatly combed hair. A sketch was produced, but without fingerprints or video surveillance, it led nowhere. Whitmore had already moved on. Investigators combed through hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, interviewed friends and families of victims, and pursued dozens of false leads. More than once, they arrested the wrong person, desperate for answers. Meanwhile, Whitmore watched the investigation unfold on the news, likely taking notes on how to avoid mistakes. One of the most frustrating near misses occurred when police unknowingly visited a property owned by Whitmore while investigating another suspect. He had rented it out under a fake name and used it as a location for at least 3 of his murders. The officers left empty-handed, unaware that a hidden basement in that very building still held traces of evidence they wouldn't discover until years later. The investigation was a war of patience and endurance. For every step forward, Whitmore seemed to take 2 back. His ability to remain invisible, even when in plain sight, was his deadliest weapon. And for years, that mask never cracked, until one fatal mistake finally brought it all down. Final breakthrough, arrest, and shocking reveal of the person behind the crimes. For years, John R. Whitmore lived undetected among the very people searching for him, smiling at neighbors, mentoring youth, and attending public safety meetings while secretly carrying out a series of horrific murders. But even the most careful killer can't stay hidden forever. What finally led to Whitmore's unmasking was not a dramatic confession or a trail of evidence, but a small, almost accidental oversight, one that cracked the mask he had so perfectly worn. In late 2019, a breakthrough came when a cold case unit reopened the files of 2 women found dead 3 years apart, but posed in identical fashion. New forensic technology allowed for more advanced trace DNA testing, and on a shoelace used to bind one of the victims, scientists recovered a partial profile. It wasn't a direct match to anyone in the system, but it led to a familial DNA hit, a distant relative of Whitmore's who had voluntarily submitted their DNA for a genealogy website. Quietly, detectives began looking into everyone related to the match, eventually narrowing it down to a man who had no criminal record, no known connection to the victims, and no reason to be suspected, until now. When investigators dug deeper into John R. Whitmore's life, cracks began to appear. Publicly, he was a trusted figure, a youth counselor, family man, and community volunteer. But privately, they found strange financial transactions, multiple properties rented under aliases, and travel records that placed him near several crime scenes over the years. More telling was a storage unit rented under a fake name. After obtaining a warrant, investigators found inside the unit boxes of women's clothing, ID cards, wigs, and journals that described some of the murders in chilling detail, written in Whitmore's handwriting. Still, investigators needed direct evidence. Under surveillance, they collected a discarded coffee cup from Whitmore, and DNA from the rim matched the partial profile from the crime scene. It was the confirmation they needed. On March 15, 2020, after months of preparation, John R. Whitmore was arrested at his suburban home without incident. His wife and children watched in stunned silence as a swarm of officers descended on their front lawn. The man they loved, the man they believed to be good and kind, was handcuffed and led away. The community's shock was overwhelming. News spread quickly. The friendly counselor who worked with troubled teens, who hosted neighborhood cookouts and attended charity drives, was the same man behind nearly 24 brutal murders. The courtroom was packed when Whitmore appeared for his arraignment. He showed no emotion, no apology, just the same calm demeanor that had helped him fool an entire town. In the end, the man behind the mask wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He didn't snarl or threaten or rage. He smiled. He held doors open. He offered help. And that is what made his unmasking so terrifying, the realization that evil had lived among them, not in darkness, but in plain sight, wearing the face of a friend,